but I'll get started. No. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to call the July 25th, 2023 Planning Commission regular meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom, online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage, or on the city's YouTube channel. If you're attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Next is roll call. Staff, will you please call roll?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Commissioner Simmons?
Here.
Commissioner Lehman?
Here.
Commissioner Mayer?
Here.
Commissioner Yodowitz?
Here.
And Chair Davies?
Here.
And I'll note for the record that Vice Chair Tagney is absent.
Thank you for that. We are joined this evening by Community Development Department staff, Director David Loya and Senior Planner Dilo Freitas. Next, we have public comment. During this time, people may make comments about items that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on one of our agenda items, you will have an opportunity when we are discussing those items. If you have comments about items that are not listed on our agenda this evening, please line up now behind the lectern. In the interest of fairness to all commenters, if you begin talking about items that are on the agenda, I will interrupt you and direct you to share those comments during the appropriate agenda item. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make oral communications on matters that are not on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen, or by pressing *9 if you are calling in. For those on Zoom, when it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to comment during early oral communications, and I will open it for 3 minutes during the subsequent agenda items. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
Good evening. I'm Fred Wise with Arcata1.com. The city's letters are out of date, almost 6 weeks now. There have been no letters printed there since June 16th, one letter since June 16th. I'm aware of at least 6 letters that have been sent to the Planning Commission since that time. I'm sure this will be taken care of soon. On Arcata1.com is a new article with some words from former Commissioner John Barstow. Short article. I'd like to know what the timeline is on the selection of a new planning commissioner and get that nailed down so we can have 7 people among you. Those of you who went to or know about the Dan Burden meeting, walkabout on walkability, my favorite line that he says, all human behavior changes when you get to 20 miles per hour. He made the point that at 20 miles an hour, it's almost a given that a car will yield to a pedestrian or bicyclist. At 25, it's maybe, and at 30, they don't. Commissioners, there's a building that Will Adams is building at 2nd and E in Old Town, Eureka. It's got step backs after the 3rd story. It's high quality materials. I recommend you take a visit and look at it if you haven't seen it already. It also has Juliet balconies that look very good. And I also suggest going out to the Danco 3- and 4-story buildings out in Manila, or Samoa, excuse me, and take a look at them, because they are not examples of what we want to see in Arcata. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments, Fred. Would anyone else in the audience like to speak to items that are not on this evening's agenda? David, anybody online?
Not seeing any online.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we will now move to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the commission and are enacted in one motion. Commissioners or members of the public can request that an item be removed for separate discussion. The only item on our consent calendar this evening is item A, approve Planning Commission minutes, regular meeting, July 11, 2023. Do any planning commissioners wish to pull the consent item, or does any member of the public or staff wish to pull the consent item?
I wish to pull the consent item.
Okay. We are now considering the minutes under the agenda item 4, items removed from the consent calendar. Did you want to let us know why you pulled those meetings, Judith?
Yes, the minutes under business items B, consider a recommendation to the City Council on the general plan updates. On a motion by Commissioner Yodowitz, a second by Vice Chair Tangney, the Commission adopted the general plan updates. I believe that misrepresents what we actually did. What we did was we forwarded a working draft of the general plan updates to the City Council for discussion and our own and their further consideration. We did not adopt the general plan updates, according to my understanding of the Commission's action.
Does staff want to address that?
Yeah, no, that's a good clarification. And I think that I would maybe go one step further and just indicate that the commission made a recommendation of the June 27. I mean, we don't want this to get too lengthy, but I would almost kind of reiterate some of what was in your motion from that. And I think that that's a really good change that should be made.
Thank you. We'll trust you to make that change and bring these minutes back to us then.
They actually don't have to be brought back to you. If you just vote to change them, we will change them. And that, you know, we've had similar sort of iterations happen with the March 14th meeting, where even though they were adopted with a change, and it's true that because of transition in staff that those minutes didn't get corrected correctly, but they were already approved. And so approving them again was kind of redundant and it just added confusion to the process. So I will certainly let you know when they are up and ready for review. If you don't wish to make the change and adopt them now, then certainly we'll bring them back. But I would encourage you to make the change and approve them. This is a routine matter.
Would you like to make a motion, Judith, with the change suggested?
I'd like to make the change that we forwarded our working draft of the general plan updates to the city council for discussion and for ours and their further consideration. If that language is incorporated into the minutes, then I would move to adopt the amended minutes.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Okay, thank you for that, Judith. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Hey, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Okay. The next item on our agenda this evening is public hearings, and we have one public hearing this evening. That is the Boughton Mixed-Use Development Design Review. I'd like to begin with a staff report.
Thank you. I will be providing the report, and I apologize in advance if I'm too close to the mic. I'm going to try really hard to be a good distance. So welcome, everyone, to the hearing tonight. This is for the Boughton Mixed-Use Development, and this is the Planning Commission's design review of the project as proposed. So I'm going to start with just some background on the project site. There is no assigned address yet, but it's APN 505-201-003. It's zoned mixed commercial, and it's currently a vacant property, but it was historically used as a creamery plant, and I have some interesting imagery on that to show you. So this is the site here. You can see it's just two parcels that make up this Greenview Neighborhood Commercial Center. And here's a couple of street view images. We have the parcel in question here, an Arcata Rentals vacation unit on the right and Greenview Market on the left. And here it is again, Greenview Market. This is from the intersection of Janes and 11th. And here is the project site. So I was looking through some of the historic imagery because the site used to be developed with a creamery plant, and I decided to bring that into this presentation and just share it really briefly, sort of as a matter of interest. So this is the site in 1948. You can see that it's actually pretty much agricultural at this point, and over time, the neighborhoods begin to fill in around it through the 1960s. The plant was created sometime before 1941. According to our records, they began dismantling the plant in 1954, and by 1970, the site was vacant and essentially as you see it today. The proposed project before the commission this evening is a mixed-use project, commercial and residential, and I'll go through some of the components of that in a minute. And Planning Commission review is required for all projects citywide currently that provide 8 or more units in a multifamily development. So the proposed project, just to break down some of these various elements, includes 2 commercial units on the first floor along 11th Street, 22 housing units. All are provided as 2-bed, 1-bath units, and they're broken up into 3 separate structures throughout the site. As well as 23 vehicle parking spaces, 18 bike parking spaces, 3 motorcycle spaces, and landscaping that meets our city standard of 10%. So just to go through the various components, this is the commercial development along 11th Street. It's proposed to house 2 commercial units with seating, landscaping, signage, and lighting along 11th. There apparently has been some confusion with the public about the potential tenants. That's not currently under review at this time. And as long as they meet the commercial use type, it's not something that we will be reviewing with this commission. But there was apparently concern about a tavern going in. The applicant did confirm today there is currently no plan for that. And a tavern would require a use permit if that did come to pass. This is the rear of that same building. You can see hanging bike parking under the stairwell here, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And then in terms of the housing component, there are, as I mentioned previously, 22 units provided, 2 above the commercial, and then another 8 in this middle building and 12 along the rear. This is partially to sort of stagger the impact, visual impact from the street, but also our mixed use requirements require residential to be located either above or behind commercial in a mixed use project. So they are meeting that standard of the land use code. And this is the elevation of the middle building housing 8 units. And this is the elevation of the third building, Building C, housing 12 units. And these are available in your packet as well. This is packet page 33 if you're following along and want to orient. So on the different modes of transportation and the parking that houses them, we have 23 vehicle parking spaces, and that's intended to be shared between the commercial tenants and the multifamily housing tenants, which is an objective of our mixed-use standards to have shared parking between the uses, as well as 18 bike parking spaces, and we'll go into the details of that a little bit further in a moment, as well as 3 motorcycle parking spaces that are provided along 11th Street, utilizing the vision clearance triangle area. And one thing to note about all 3 of these types of parking on site is that they exceed the standard for each type. So again, this is where the parking is housed on the site, sort of in the interior, blocking the view of it from the street, providing access to all the different uses on site. The motorcycle parking is located here in the vision clearance area, and then the bike parking is distributed throughout the units. So also just a quick note on the landscaping. As I mentioned, they do meet our standard 10%. And they also do incorporate our guidance on the use of drought-tolerant and native species. I wanted to call attention to the wax myrtle located along the northern property boundary. Wax myrtle is not only a great native species, they also grow very large. And I know that there was a concern raised from multiple members of the public just about screening and privacy. And the applicant is willing to add additional wax myrtle along that property boundary as needed, to ensure additional privacy. And those, I believe, will be 5-gallon plantings with 15-gallon plantings of the various larger tree species. So a couple of just overarching project notes that we go into more detail in the staff report. I'm just going to go through them pretty quickly, but feel free to ask any questions about them if you'd like. So again, site history. This was the location of the United Creamery plant for many years, but after the 1950s, the site has been vacant. It was purchased by the previous owners, I believe, in the 80s, 90s, and a project was brought forward in 1992. They originally proposed 55 units, 1-bedroom units, brought it down to 44 units, and ultimately the Planning Commission at that time adopted findings of denial. To the Westwood Gardens project, state law does put more bounds on findings of denial in our current climate than it did in 1992. And just really briefly to talk about the site studies existing and proposed, because of the historic contamination associated with the creamery, there were phase 1 and phase 2 studies done after the denial in 1992. That project that came forward at that time also did geotechnical work and a drainage study, which give us sort of a starting point for that work, and we will build on it subsequently as part of the building permit review process, which comes after the design review. And a cultural resources study was requested by the local area TIPOs for this project. That's the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. A report was prepared, and there were no cultural resources, no potential for cultural resources found on site, but inadvertent discovery language has still been provided anyway as a condition. And in terms of upcoming studies that will be prepared after the design review, we do have geotechnical and drainage work to start with, but our city engineer and building official will be responsible for reviewing any supplemental material required to meet building code and engineering regulations. And the city engineer has also requested a traffic study, and that is all built into the existing conditions of approval. And the city engineer did note as well that the city is working currently on its first roadway safety plan. Depending on various traffic counts throughout the city, 11th Street will likely be seeing additional improvements, but it will be dependent on the work that's done as part of that plan. And it won't necessarily be tied to this project, but that will be part of the analysis landscape, if you will. So for the historic contamination, I did touch on that briefly already, but there was a active case, you can find it on the GeoTracker site, related to lead and petroleum hydrocarbons found in the soils associated with the creamery plant. They were removed to an acceptable level via excavation, and there was a case closure letter published a couple of years ago that did create a land use covenant that affected a portion of the site that currently contains the proposed parking area, and also some restrictions on further excavation on site, which are already built into the conditions of approval as drafted. And a note on the density as well. This is something that we may need to go into in more detail, and I'll probably be asking David to weigh in on that as well if he would like to. But the density calculation is based on their base density in addition to allowances per ministerial ADU law. And these are things that we are required to adhere to, not optional, but it does increase their density pretty significantly, utilizing the 25% conversion of proposed space. And a couple of things that have come up from public comment after we finalized the report. I think we had 6 or 7 new public comments that came in today. Those should have been printed for each of you up at the dais, and we have copies here for the public if you'd like to come look at it. But as a result of the comment that's come in over the past several days, we've had some discussions with the applicants about things that they'd be willing to discuss further with the commission, depending on your interest. And we have built in a new condition requiring that all required parking spaces that are required per city code, which is 12 of the proposed 18 spaces, be provided not as hanging spaces, but as upright spaces, meaning wheels on the ground. The additional 6 they can provide hanging if they choose to. And the applicant is open to discussing providing additional bike spaces at the pleasure of the commission. And in terms of privacy, as I mentioned before, the applicant is open to providing additional plantings of wax myrtles on the property boundary to the north to provide more privacy to the neighbors. So just a final note on sort of the scale of the project and various general plan element findings that you are required to make. The commercial mixed zone type allows a height of up to 35 feet and a maximum floor area ratio of 2.0. That means a full build out of every square inch of the site up to 2 stories in height. We did the calculation and they're coming in at about 0.4. So this is just to say that the applicant is building well within their allowed envelope, and this site has been zoned commercial mixed for many, many years. Even after the denial of the original proposal in 1992, there was no move that I could find to rezone the site to residential low density or another zone type. So this was always still on the table as an opportunity for folks to come in and develop this with a mixed use, medium density residential project. And in terms of general plan policy, I won't read these things off the slides directly, but these are in your findings as well. The project does fit very neatly with some of the policy vision of the city that we've had in the books for many years, including providing opportunities for infill development that include well-designed landscaping, breaks in wall and roof lines, building separations, gradual increases in building height, as well as just simply encouraging the development of mixed-use projects as an efficient use of existing land. And there is an implementation in our adopted housing element, which actually sets a target for 1 new mixed-use project every 2 years. This is the first that we have seen come forward since 2019, when the 6th cycle housing element was adopted. For growth management, there is policy language that incentivizes and encourages development within the city's existing boundary, and this includes our identified activity areas, including existing neighborhood commercial centers. And again, land use has a strong incentive for creating projects that redevelop brownfield sites or vacant sites within city limits, and also commercial projects that are close to existing transit. We have a bus line about 500 feet from the property line, and good bike and pedestrian access into downtown along 11th. So that's just sort of to give you an overview of the findings that we've made related to how this adheres to city policy. And we recommend that the commission approve the project by adopting a Class 32 CEQA exemption related to infill projects, and adopting the action as drafted with one suggested added condition, which is that all required bike parking be required as upright sheltered bike parking in easily accessible locations, meaning wheels on the ground. So that concludes my presentation, and I know the applicant is with us this evening as well as their agent. And David, would you like to add anything additional before we turn it over to them?
The only couple of things that I wanted to add was if there were questions of the commission around the density calculation. Some of you weren't on the commission when this was addressed the last time, so I'd be happy to go into that in more detail. But the synopsis is that with state ADU law, multifamily developments have a number of ways in which they can increase their density. And so the commission has reviewed those ways previously and determined that instead of waiting for a development to be built with all these excess spaces that can be converted into accessory dwelling units in the future, and not having that be part of the project review at the time when it comes forward to the Planning Commission, that you actually get a chance to evaluate that when you approve the project. So recognizing that the density that the approval comes at includes all of the ADUs, and they couldn't then come back and say, well, now we want to use state ADU law to add more units. They've already included them in their original proposal. The other thing I wanted to mention about the this new finding here is I believe that this was developed in conjunction with the applicant's consent. Our code actually splits between sheltered parking. So sheltered is not a requirement of all bike parking, but I believe, and I'll let the applicant speak to this, but I believe they feel like they can accommodate that in this case. So they've met and exceeded the bike parking with the addition of this additional condition of approval. And then I did want to just say one thing. I don't know how relevant this is to to your decision, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear that there were some publication of this in the media, and I wanted to make sure that it was clear to the public and to the commission that the way it was described in the article, the review process, I believe the words relatively straightforward were used as a description of what my conversation with the reporter were. That was, just to put that in context, that was in relation to a question that was, how does this relate to the Craftsman's Mall project? And so I responded, relative to that project, it's more straightforward. This is obviously a discretionary review. The Planning Commission needs to take into consideration all of the facts that you learn, both from the staff report and from public comment, weigh those. You have the ability to add conditions of approval. It's a decision that is not by right, but we did want to emphasize that in our review of this project, we believe that all of the city standards are met. I know I've been approached by a couple of commissioners that may want to discuss, potential, alternatives for the, for the applicant to review. But I want to make sure that, it's clear to everyone that just because it's a straightforward process doesn't mean that it's a foregone conclusion. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about that as well.
Thanks for that clarification. Director Loya. We will have Planning Commission deliberations after public comment, but I wanted to just make sure to check in and see if any other planning commissioners had any clarifying questions for staff or the applicant. Judith?
Yeah, thank you very much. I have several. A couple relate to the site plan, and one relates to the 25% ADU, what you're calling the conversion. And either the applicant or staff could address these, or maybe both. The first relates, and also on the bicycles. So the first relates to the site plan. After reading some of the public comments, especially with regard to the height and location of buildings on the site relative to neighbors, I was wondering if the applicant had considered a site plan that would move the access to the parking over to the west side, so that, and then potentially moving the rear buildings forward, so that some of the neighbors to the north would not have the complaints that they've made about the height in their face, the blocked views, and the impacts to privacy. That would still retain the no-build area in the contaminated part of the site and provide an opportunity for shared access, which the city encourages, with the Greenview Markets parking lot. So that's one question I'd love somebody to address. Obviously, it's not part of the proposed design, but I think if it were, it probably could address several of the objections to the project. The second issue has to do with the ADU law at the state level. I nerdishly went and actually looked up the section of the law involved. And yes, indeed, there is that 25% premium that you get as a density bonus. What I don't understand is, my understanding is that when you designate an accessory dwelling unit, it's an accessory dwelling unit to a primary dwelling. And yet in a multi-family, multiple use project like this, you never actually designate which are the primary dwellings at stake, and the law doesn't specify how that would work. Is that a part of the picture at all?
I think the way that you've described accessory dwelling being accessory to a primary is certainly the way that ADU law, accessory dwelling unit law, was interpreted originally. In fact, it used to be called second unit law, so there was a primary and a secondary unit. And that's been evolving over time, and it's been evolving quickly over the last couple of years, so that the state now considers accessory dwellings anything that's accessory to the density that's permitted by the underlying zoning. And in fact, it goes beyond that, because if there's a multifamily building on a site, regardless of zoning type, you're allowed to take advantage of some of the multifamily accessory dwelling unit provisions and get additional density above, say, what you would be otherwise authorized on a residential low density parcel. So it's a law that's been written by, many cooks, and it's, frankly, a complete mess and really difficult to interpret. The Housing Community Development has, provided some guidance on accessory dwelling unit law. And so we defer to that quite frequently. And then we have, through the actions of the Planning Commission, taken steps towards implementing state law in the way that seems to make sense for our local jurisdiction. So short answer is, yeah, there's no primary unit.
Okay, and I did look that up. And to get there, you're down to the 7th level of the law, and yeah, it's kind of in there, but have we ever actually used that particular feature yet in Arcata?
Yeah, so that was discussed a little bit in the staff report, but it was before some of the commissioners were on the commission. And I will let David speak to that. He was there, I was not, but this did come up with a different project brought forward by the same applicant, the 6th Street project, which had very similar, a very similar situation. They wanted to utilize ADU law. They proposed something with the intent of bringing a more holistic picture before the commission for full review. At that time, the commission was in favor of the direction the applicant was going and the rationale, that staff brought forward about why it was a better design project if we analyzed the full picture with all units as opposed to allowing them to come in after the original approval and convert that 25% of the space.
Okay, and the third question I wanted to raise, which the applicant and staff could address, is about the bicycle parking. I would really hope that once we do adopt our general plan update and the updated land use code associated with it, that we will be requiring multi-dwelling projects to provide one covered secure bicycle parking space per bedroom at least. Obviously, that's not in the code now. But if there could be an opportunity to actually increase the number of on-the-ground covered secure bicycle spaces as part of this project, has the applicant considered that that would actually be great marketing, and that the revised site plan would in fact provide a perfect place to locate it? Okay, those are my questions.
Thanks for those questions, Judith, and clarification staff. Do any other commissioners have questions for staff before we go to comments? Peter?
I just wanted to support what Judith just said. I think having more secure bicycle spaces would be really helpful. I mean, we're trying to promote walkability and no car kind of lifestyle, and people need bikes if they're going to live that way.
I want to make sure that we're restricting ourselves to questions for staff right now, and we'll have deliberations after public comment. Any more questions for staff, Joel?
Yeah, I do. Regarding the height of the buildings, I'm getting older and my eyes are not as what they once were, if they were ever good. But I just want to confirm the height of the structures, both the mixed use. It looks to me that that's 27 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe it's 27 or 28. That rings a bell.
Okay, and the rear two buildings are 24?
Yeah, I just have this tiny printed one. Let's see if I can bring it up on the site plan. And potentially the applicant's agent can verify that for us as well. In fact, I might just ask them to speak to that, since I believe they'll be coming up to address some of the questions brought by Commissioner Mayer.
Okay, the reason I'm bringing this up is just to confirm that there might have been an opportunity to go higher.
Correct. Yeah, there would have been an opportunity to go higher. A good comparison would be potentially the Valley East Lofts project that the commission saw earlier this year. Commissioner Yodowitz, I can't recall if you were with us at that time or not, but it's the same 35-foot allowance, and they came quite a bit closer. They provided basically 2.5 stories. They had loft units. So they maxed it out quite a bit more than this project is proposing to do currently.
I thought of a question. So the covered secured bike parking would be for residents, but there's also proposed commercial use. Were there any plans or discussion of, like a bike rack for people visiting on bike to use the commercial use?
Yeah, the bicycle parking is actually calculated based on the total number of parking spaces, so it's not restricted to the residential uses. And I think the applicant can speak to, distribution of those, but I think, certainly the bike parking is currently spread throughout the entire project, so it's easily accessible by all the different uses, regardless of whether, an individual in the unit that's near that bike parking actually uses it. Somebody else can use it because it's nearby.
Yeah, and there are 5 proposed on the back of the commercial structure, and I did discuss with the applicant and the agent some of the concerns about bike parking on a couple different occasions, so they're very much primed for that conversation. I'm sure they're happy to answer your questions on that.
Okay, thanks for that quick question. Before I turn it over to public comment and we hear from first the applicant, did I catch it correctly? Did you say that the project was coming in at just 40% of what was possible project size?
Well, 40, it's point, a little bit of math, thinking about this in my head. So they came in at 0.4 floor area ratio. They're allowed 2.0. So I think that would be a fifth of
20%.
the overall allowed project size.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we will move to public comment. Since this is a discretionary decision, which operates similar to a court hearing, we will allow the applicant to speak first. The public may then provide public comment. The applicant will have the opportunity to speak last if they wish to address any comments that were made about the project. This process affords the applicant and the public due process before the commission renders a decision. It also provides the commission the opportunity to hear all perspectives prior to making a decision on the whole of the record, including the application materials, the staff report, public comment, and any other information provided in these proceedings. Each speaker will have 3 minutes except for the applicant, who may use their initial time to provide a presentation or any information they believe is relevant to our decision. The applicant will then have 6 minutes for a final rebuttal after public comment. And with that, I'd like to invite the applicant to speak first to the project.
Yeah, so we have the applicant's agent, Sarah Atkins, on Zoom, and I believe David has brought her in. So Sarah, feel free to take it away.
Perfect. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So mainly if there's any questions of me, I'd be happy to answer those. And then I'd probably like to revisit the podium, virtual podium, once the public has spoken. I think a lot of the main issues the staff has already spoken to, or the main concerns or questions, a lot of that being bike parking. That's a super easy fix. We can easily add bike racks versus the hanging racks. That wasn't a intentional decision, but we do have bike parking spread throughout the property. As far as discretionary, we are here because we're doing more than 8 units, as Dilo pointed out, although we're not asking for any exceptions to any design zoning standards. So we're not asking for exceptions to height, setbacks, density, coverage, parking, anything. It's merely just the design review component for 8 or more units. So obviously, when we start any project, we look real closely at our design parameters and what we have to work with. Obviously, this site had a few additional parameters with the no build area in the middle of the parcel, which kind of defined a good spot for the parking. And then in addition, the city, the zone requires that residential cannot be on the ground floor in the first 75 feet of the property. So commercials up front, we have an additional couple units up there, and that by default pushes the residential to the back. So I guess if there's any immediate questions, feel free to ask and I can see if I can answer them now. Otherwise, I'd like to step back in at the end of the presentation.
Sarah, would you mind speaking to Commissioner Mayer's question about the sort of site layout in terms of setbacks and the drive aisle, please?
Yeah, I guess I didn't quite 100% follow that. The parking kind of has to stay in the middle as our no build area. But I guess I can't really speak that the owner is going to give us, or the adjacent neighbor is going to give us an easement through his property, and I venture to guess that he wouldn't entertain that, as that would limit, the whole entire front half of his property. So we did not explore that, but I'm fairly positive that that would not be an option. Where we did place the parking, again, is also centrally located. The parking is not just for residential, it's for the commercial. So it's centrally located between the two uses, but as you pointed out, hidden. So we're not street front on most of the parking. Did that answer the question, or was there more questions?
I think what I was asking wasn't just about getting an easement through the Greenview parking lot, but about moving the structures to the east of the site rather than having them right up against the western and northern boundary, and moving some of them forward so that that would address some of the neighbors' concerns, which you've seen in the letters.
Yeah, so I guess in main part, we aren't developing the east side of the property. We kind of looked at this, up close. Whether they're, I mean, there's a couple driving factors. The 75-foot setback from the front is one of them, and that no build is another, and we kind of design around it. Could we push some of them east? Yes, but then we're going to have the same complaints from the neighbors on the east, and they'll still be along the north property line just because of that 75-foot setback pushing the units back. I guess that's the most I can kind of speak to that at this point.
Do any other commissioners have a question for Sarah while we've got her on Zoom? If not, then would the applicant, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
So I really appreciate that you addressed the parking issue. You are still above your minimum parking requirements. And so purely as a suggestion, you could reduce your car parking and add additional bike parking so that we get closer to the one bike per bed that Commissioner Mayer suggested. Purely a suggestion. I understand you're above the requirements for both, but I thought I'd broach it.
I think on the parking, let me go to my calcs here. Yeah, we have minimum required, and Delo can speak to this if need be, but we had 20 spaces required. We had 23 provided. We couldn't reduce 3, but adding the bike parking we could do regardless. Even if we leave the 23, right now we have the 18. We can definitely add more. The bike parking is an easy thing to fit in there. We have plenty of open space, so we can easily add racks.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Peter.
Sarah, is there a reason that you are trying to keep that eastern area totally free? I mean, why not use it for, as Judith suggested, moving the homes further to the east and a little bit further south so that you give a little more room to the neighbors on the north? There's only one neighbor to the east. There are many neighbors to the north.
Yeah, I guess I might let Kyle speak a little bit to this since it is his property. I think we were just leaving that open for, anything to consider in the future. Right now it's open space. The property is zoned commercial. So there's the potential of, a coffee shop or something up in this front commercial does really well. You might want to, expand a couple small niche. So I think the idea was just to kind of maximize the project and possibly phases, but at this point the houses, because they're pushed back, we could pull them forward a little bit if we were able, we went back to redesign, but it still wouldn't completely solve the issue on the north because of that 75-foot setback in the front, if that makes sense.
Okay. Would the applicant care to weigh in and add anything now before we move to public comment? Step right up.
All right, good evening. My name's Kyle Bowden. Thanks everybody for being here this evening. Yeah, just to briefly touch, I do want to just note that, I am a local person here. I was actually raised right down the road from here and went to elementary school just a few blocks away. So I relate to a lot of the issues and stuff that we're dealing with, and I want to work together to, create a nice development for the neighborhood. To answer a few questions regarding the layout, one of the major setbacks that we had with this site, with the land use code, we are required to have that 75-foot setback from the commercial up front. And then on top of that, we did have the restriction with the contamination issues. So that kind of played a lot into why we had this layout. And then also noted in the far top right corner on the east side of the property, there is a very, very large tree there that does overhang a good portion of that property. But the major setback was the 75 feet from the commercial. And as Sarah mentioned, we could slide those buildings forward a little bit, but then things start to get constrained, and really a couple feet probably wouldn't make that much of a difference on the backside. And then to briefly touch on the bike parking, like has been mentioned by many others, we're totally willing and open to adding additional bike parking and making sure that is on the ground level and not hanging to. So we're completely open to working with that and adding additional bike parking. So hopefully that answers some questions before we get in public comment.
Okay, thank you
right.
very much. Joel, you had a question for the applicant?
Well, first I'd like to direct a question to staff, if I may. Regarding the 75-foot setback from the commercial use, is that something, had the applicant requested, that could be waived or reduced by variance?
Certainly by variance, it's a possibility. There's also a minor use permit to amend standards. I'd have to review whether this is one that could be amended by a land use standard. It's embedded in the mixed use development standards. It is at this point something that we're going to recommend revisiting as we're going through zoning updates related to our general plan revisions, because it is a significant constraint on feasibility of projects. This is a unique site. Most commercial mixed sites are much smaller than this, and so there's actually quite a bit of flexibility on this site. But I think that part of the thing that is being considered here is sort of what future flexibility might look like, and making sure that this land is still available for for housing in the future as well.
Go ahead, Matt.
If we're switching to public comment, can I request just a 2-minute bio break before we take public comment?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Let's take a quick 2 minutes, and we'll be back for public comment. We'll give you a chance at the end. Thank you. Okay, we are back, everyone. Appreciate your patience. We are ready to take public comment now, inviting the public to speak. If you'd please line up behind the lectern, we are ready for your public comment.
Hi, my name is Lisa Larson, and I love what you said, Judith. And my question is wondering, if it was not mixed use, would it still have to be back 75 feet? And I don't understand how, if you have 22 places to live and 2 businesses, do people have to park down the street to have a place to park so they can get home? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to have 2 bedrooms in each one and not even enough parking spaces for that many people. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Thea Sevelson, I live on Daniels. I will be so impacted by this project, I just can't even tell you how upset I am. Those small lots, small yards, that building is going to be right up shadowing there's 3 or 4 of us homeowners who will be shaded out. It's just terrible. Can't you move these 4 to the side, bring those other ones back, provide at least a little less shading? They're just too tall. We put balloons up yesterday to see what that was going to be like. It's crazy, that close to my house, or to our houses. It's not just me. I don't see the need to do that. And commercial spaces with all the empty buildings between Arcata and Eureka, and you're allowing more. I understand that's what the lot is able to contain, but you're just going to have more empty commercial spaces, dude.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening. Regarding the traffic study aspect of it, the traffic studies are useless unless we follow the laws, and there's laws as far as our safety elements, our noise element, and what I have observed in the last 5 years in the city, and also talking to the police, is that we don't have any enforcement of cars that are speeding down our streets. And I'll give you an example just at 16th and H. Since living there, I've witnessed there's a 4-way stop, a vehicle slammed into 5 cars that were just parked on the street. On 16th Street, a car smashed into a truck and pushed the truck into the sidewalk and flipped upside down. There was gas meters for apartment complex directly behind that. If he hadn't hit that truck, he would have hit all those manifolds, blown up the whole neighborhood. And there's a vehicle that ran into a telephone pole a block away and knocked the telephone pole over. So what I'm witnessing is basically, we have all these fine words as far as how we're going to keep our neighborhood safe. And this is an area that is definitely not quite as busy as some of our other streets, the HG, Alliance, and K. And I don't see any enforcement on those streets. And I've also verified that by talking to the police, at least during the COVID period. And they, confirmed what my observations were. So I see problems right now. It's good that we have engineering aspects as for bicycle lanes, but bicycle lanes in this city is basically just a paint on the road. And if we don't have enforcements, which is a big deal between major cities in the US, that's when we have someone die in crosswalks, they always go after, vehicles that are speeding and try to not just engineer it with cameras and those aspects. So we're kind of a disaster in that area, from my opinion, and I don't see, I guess we're going to get some more police, so maybe that will change. But regarding the bicycle issue, I think I was at an open house, and I think Judith was there too, and it was interesting from the perspective of bicycle racks from students that they need to be like secured, because part of the reason they're not riding their bikes is their bikes are getting stolen. So I'm not like suggesting that for this project, but that seems to be a problem. Another problem that I've read about quite a bit is that e-bikes that are being stored in apartments, the batteries are blowing up. There's been a lot of incidents in large cities where they're starting fires and killing people. So the bicycle rack is important from that standpoint, that you don't have expensive bikes that are stored in apartments.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else like to speak to this project? Thank you.
Hi, James Flower. I live at the bottom of 11th Street. So I'm half a block or less from this proposed project, but I'm not as impacted as the people at the north side. In Berkeley, my grandma lived in a single-family house, and a two-story apartment building was built behind her, and it just loomed up over the backyard and changed the entire character and aesthetics of the thing. The people on the east side of this project have chosen to rent out their house as a vacation rental, a short-term vacation rental, and I would submit that the people in that rental don't have as much right to maintain aesthetics as the people who have lived on Daniel Street for many, many years. So I'm speaking for them, and I hope they don't mind. I appreciate Kyle being a neighborhood boy, and perhaps he would give us a legally enforceable promise not to rent or lease to a business which allows people to get intoxicated in any way on the premises. That would be very, very important to me. I know he says he has no plans for a tavern, and it's not that I don't trust him, but a legally enforceable promise would be really nice. Janes Road hasn't been improved in a long time. People do tend to go pretty fast along it. Actually, it's not too bad considering what it could be, but we have had some close calls. Children go to the schools nearby. The teachers lead long chains of children along those streets, crossing all those streets. The other day, there was a cement truck that had to skid to a stop. It wasn't a life-threatening event, but it wasn't what we would want for any of our children. So there's going to be increased traffic, of course, with these 22 new units. So I'd like to see something done for the safety of Janes Road, and I would commend Mr. Burden's work. I think Fred mentioned that earlier, and his ideas about how to improve traffic and make places more people-oriented. I don't know how important the commercial space is to this project financially, but it sounds like the problem, the place might be able to be, the same number of units might be able to be achieved with single stories if there weren't the retail, because evidently that 75-foot setback is required by the retail, the presence of the retail there. So that's another idea I would have. I like the idea of having a little cafe or something in my neighborhood, but I don't like it so much that I want to inconvenience longtime neighbors and really, really denigrate the character of their homes. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Next speaker.
Hi there, Josh Levine. I have prepared remarks, but they're a little all over the place, and so I'll do my best to keep myself under 3 minutes. Good evening, planning commissioners, staff. Let me begin by emphasizing that I recognize and am affected by the lack of affordable housing in our area and our state, and I absolutely support building more housing. I support housing that enhances our communities and the character, and that is affordable. The plans as submitted depict a development that does not enhance the community, is not ensuring affordability, and will negatively impact this affordable neighborhood as it stands. Such careful work in design review is incredibly important and should be considered as a benefit to the prospective tenants, their existing neighbors, and the future tax rolls of the city. It's our duty to make sure this project is a boon to our community now and in the future. One of the more significant concerns is the open space area that's marked there. It is very much looking like it's Phase 2, part of a subdivision that would likely occur and allow for more density on this project. And if that's the case, it would be nice to be looking at that now before you, rather than as a section piecemeal project. If it is to be open space, it would be nice to be deed restricted or at least landscaped so that it is not just the weeds, Himalayan berry, and home to rats, and cats, and foxes, and possums, and all sorts of wonderful creatures, but also to people defecating and using it as a trash bin for the Greenview Market. The development must meet and maintain the character of the community. A buffer of, at the very least, of 15 feet between the existing residential uses and the projected development could allow for a much more vegetated buffer, including those wax myrtles, but other species as well that could grow to even higher heights, and allowing for a vegetative buffer that would reduce those impacts of sound and visual and noise, or noises. So. Another concern is the parking. And although, we're talking about 22 units, we're talking about 44 bedrooms. And in the neighborhood already, there are family, there's single-family residential houses with 3 bedrooms. That's not one family car. That's 3 people with each having a car, each having visitors. And that's already happened in the other North Star development just down the road, where they have, multiple units, multiple bedrooms, though, and each bedroom contains its own car. And as much as I would love to see everybody on a bicycle, this development does not seem to be encouraging that quite as much as our city needs to do. And some suggestions in order to do that might be, as we've talked about, adding more parking for bicyclists, but also maybe requiring bus pass for people, or including what are the Humboldt bike share stations at the site. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name's Richard Stein, and I live on the north side of the proposed project. I just want you for a moment, maybe you all know, imagine we're talking 10 feet, right?
I'm sorry, sir. Can you speak into the mic? Folks can't hear at home.
Well, we're talking 10 feet from the back of my property to the face of the north side. It's going to be as tall as this, right? So you can imagine, you can see out. Now all of a sudden, you have this way up in your thing, So all due respect to the builder, I'm a mason. I understand, buying and building, and I understand the city's need to grow. But at the same time, with all due respect to the people who have been holding it down for 30, 40 years, I just think we all in the area, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak and be heard, and my neighbors as well. It's a tricky dance between what needs to happen, what is happening, and what has already happened to help support even this spot that would have all this growth. And I think the applicant had stated there's a tree on this side here. Okay, I love trees, but in terms of sanity, my family, my friends, my neighbors, if that was the only hindrance to shifting the whole layout, especially being that that's a rental property, and the one on the north side next to this one is a rental property, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense not to at least consider adjusting the layout. And then the other thing I wanted to say is we're privileged to have neighbors that are renters who happen to be college students. Bless their heart. I'm all about growth and all about the students, and I love the kids. But can you imagine if that whole conglomeration is filled with a whole lot of college kids partying? I'll tell you what, I don't know if you've had neighbors who play drums who are students, but at 3, 4 in the afternoon, so we're all trying to bend a little here. But collectively, what this represents is daunting. And, oops, sorry. So anyways, amen. Thank you for having me. Appreciate you.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Yeah, good evening. My name's Trevor Goff. My wife and I own a property on Daniel Street. Used to live there for years. I was having a hard time reviewing this site plan as a lot of...
Sorry, excuse me. Can we get you to start over? We missed the first part of that with outside noise.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Anyway, my name's Trevor Goff. My wife and I own a property on Daniel Street. We lived there for several years. before moving. But we currently rent to some her coworkers. But anyway, I had a hard time reviewing this site plan as there's really a lack of existing topographic detail, and I don't know, not too hard to figure out, but the fence lines in the back is not a straight line like shown on the site plan. So I think there's kind of an unresolved property boundary issue on that side, which may impact setbacks from buildings and such. And also, there's some existing utilities running back there, which would impact our property. I don't know what the plans are for the existing utilities, if they're going to remain or be underground or what. So I think we'd like to know those details, be able to analyze impacts to the all the neighbors and everyone and living in the area. Then also, I know this is mentioned that's going to come at a later time, but this is really flat area. And it'd be really nice to know the site grading plan to be able to see how that's going to be handled. And also, finished grade elevations. We have the height of the building, but how high above it or below existing ground is that? That's details that are lacking. It's kind of hard to analyze the impacts. And also, and it's kind of mentioned before, but these structures not consistent kind of with the surrounding neighborhood. I think an existing multi-unit example that would be nice is as an example that is consistent is 1945 and 1947 11th Street. Got an existing duplex, kind of built in the area of the neighborhood. And just kind of as a note about the parking, Greenview Market, no residential units, 35 parking spots. So it's kind of put that in perspective for this development. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else like to make some public comments on this project?
Can I speak one more time?
Sorry.
Good evening. My name is Thomas Guy. I am a resident and property owner of Daniel Street. I appreciate Kyle's comment about being a local. I'm a local as well, and we have quite a few locals here and people who have lived in this neighborhood for quite some time, some people since the 1950s. I understand this is what the city wants. It's not what we want. No, we are all adversely affected by this. If you look at the setbacks of 10 feet, it's absolutely ridiculous what that will do to the solar gain of all of our properties on Daniel Street. Then on top of that, you're suggesting putting vegetation, which we know in Humboldt County will grow crazily. So anybody who is currently enjoying their privacy, their solar gain, and in the future or currently has solar panels will be pretty much blocked out. That is the south. Also the 5-foot setback to the property line that brings it incredibly close to Greenview Market. I just find this current plan untenable. And I'd like to quote the SECA 32 exemption. The Class 32 infill categorical exemption. Hereafter, let's get to the good meat of it. Okay. Sorry, it's very small. Oh, losing it. I apologize. Okay. This class is not intended for projects that would result in any significant traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality impacts. The exemption is not limited to any use type and may apply to residential, commercial, industrial, public, and mixed-use projects. Obviously, This property's increased drainage problems due to all of these buildings, as well as the parking, will have a massive impact on water, have a massive impact on traffic, noise, all of it. So I urge you to have the applicant revisit this and not approve this project as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else care to share comments on this project?
Get up here and stand up here. I live directly across the lot, and I'm concerned about the parking also. I mean, that's 22 units, 2 bedrooms, that's 44 rooms, bedrooms. And that is not enough. I mean, they're going to be parking on my side of the street, and there's no way I can back out of my driveway when there's cars parked on the side of the street. There's no way at all. So that's a big concern for me, really. So, okay. So that's what I thought for today. So, okay.
Thank you very much for sharing.
Hi, Christine Perry, resident and homeowner on Daniel Street. I recognize the need for housing in our community, which is being addressed around the university and Gateway project. I also respect the developer's right to build on his property. The issue I have with this proposed multi-story complex is what it'll do to our quiet, established neighborhood. High-density housing does not always fit the location and should not be the only option. There must be a red line as to how these builds affect the area and people living there. This part of the city is a family-oriented, single-story housing community. As the design stands now, it will negatively impact our lives in many ways. First of which is noise that such a large build and so many added people will bring to our surroundings. Second concern is traffic. There are many children in this area, along with their schools and a handicapped accessible playground 1 block away from this development. Third concern is crime. With more people and businesses, more crime follows. It's unfortunate enough that Greenview Market has turned from a nice family market to a rundown place that mostly sells alcohol. There will be more crime against people and property with a high-density housing complex. Fourth concern is depreciation of our property values. Putting a multi-story housing complex against our one-story homes is a total invasion of privacy that nobody wants to live with. I'm asking you to please consider the following changes to the design plan as compromise that we can all live with. Limit the number of units to 15 instead of 22, especially with the parking issues. Maximum 1-story units with lower roof lines and using the east side meadow for units that as of now are the 2nd-story plans. Move the green space to the north side of the property where the majority of homeowners will be most affected by this development. Plant 30 to 40-foot mature trees along the entire length of the north side fences, as well as leaving the existing tree if possible on the east side. There's many wonderful bird species. Make this development a harmonious part of our neighborhood with 1-story units. On a personal note, I would like to say I will be affected. I am housebound 80% of the time. All I have is a view of the beautiful mountain line, and this will completely change my life long-term. I also fear for my personal safety as a survivor of sexual assault. This proposal of 2-story units directly behind my house would allow strangers to look into my home and yard, and that is terrifying to me. I shouldn't have to live with my curtains closed to protect myself. Being disabled and housebound, I would be a prisoner in my own home. In closing, there's appropriate areas for high-density housing in our community, and there are areas that's totally inappropriate, such as our neighborhood. To think that it's okay to decimate people's happy way of life and rights to privacy is unconscionable and honestly quite callous. Should this complex be developed as proposed, it will permanently ruin my quality of life, and that's unacceptable. I am asking you, please compromise this design into one-story units with lower roof lines and green space with personal privacy on the north side.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else like to comment on this project?
Good evening, Fred Wise. There's a question of what is called sheltered bike parking, or what's on the applicant's drawings as covered bike storage. I regard storage under stairs or decks not as sheltered from the elements at all. And I would like to see actual enclosed bike storage for this project, because we're trying to send a good message of what we're trying to do here in Arcata, encouraging bike use. There should be, I think, at least 300 square feet of enclosed bike storage, perhaps more. The bike parking for the commercial, I think, should be separated from the residential. Second, there's a letter that you received from Philip Robertson, which I regard as having a lot of good points. One of them relative to architectural design. This project has shed roofs, which is not compatible with the neighborhood. I find it very unpleasing aesthetically, that's personally, but certainly kind of in discord with everything else around there. There is a question about what's going to happen to this lawn area on the right. I would rather see a project that included a build out for the entire property come to the commission, even if it's not going to be built soon. And lastly, an odd item. The newer planning commissioners may not know this, but letters from the public used to be enclosed in the packets in time for the meeting for which the letter was written. And it was very good because we could see what other members of the public were saying about that night's topics. This was ended by the community development director without discussion with the commission about a year ago in August 2022. There's a letter from me included in tonight's packet. The issue is I didn't write a letter to the planning commission. I wrote a personal note to Commissioner Simmons and to Colin Fisk, and it brings up a question: if someone writes a letter to a single commissioner, it can then be included in the packet, or it'll always be included in the packet. I looked at this property about 25 years ago for possible use for an office building for North Coast Children's Services, and we rejected it because it just wouldn't be a good public relations fit, even though there wouldn't be children coming to the site. It would be an office building. I'm glad to see something happen to it, but as many, many people have said, I think the design could be much improved. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your comments, Fred. Does anybody else here in the audience care to comment on this project? If so, step right up.
My name is Kim Shrubsole, and I live directly across from Greenview Park. So I'm also a mother and a concerned homeowner. The aesthetics of when we moved into the house that we live in, everybody's the same. The houses are all nice. They're all single story, most with families, and that Greenview Park is always populated with kids, no matter what the weather. It can be raining, it can be windy, there are kids there playing. My daughter walks to school, lots of her friends walk to school. You're looking at putting in 22 apartments with 44 people, with mostly you're concerned with bikes. To me, that means that you're not thinking that it's going to be family homes, it's going to be college students. And I was a college student, we were all college students at some point, but we all know that college students like to party. There's a market right next door, alcohol very easy to get for college students. This is going to change the dynamics of my sweet little neighborhood. And it just hurts me that we're putting college students and other people in front of our children's needs. and our desires. And the change of the environment that you are going to create is just detrimental to Arcata. We are ruining Arcata by changing the dynamics.
Thank you for those comments. Would anyone else in the audience here like to comment? Thank you. If anyone else would like to comment, please line up so we can keep the comments moving.
Take a few minutes of, I own a home on west side of 11th Street. We used to live there when my boys graduated high school. I rented out. I actually think about my renters. So our concern is mainly the parking, like most neighbors experience. But also my tenant, she's a single mother and has 2 daughters. One is high school, one is middle school. She's concerned about the commercial space. Just like one of the neighbor bring out, that there's enough commercial space. Perhaps maybe the developer don't have vacant space, you know. It's the Greenview market is like, she said that she won't allow her daughters to take the dog for a walk because a few times there's just drunken people there and doesn't feel safety. And we just kind of don't want to have a neighborhood that has more commercial space and then just more people hanging around, you know, at late night, stuff like that. That's pretty much, you know, I want to express our concerns, the parking and the safety for the neighborhood, for its commercial space. Thank you, yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments.
It's Tate Scharnberg, and I live on Daniels. And when I look at this plan, I see 22 units, 2 bedrooms. That's potentially 44 cars. And in the winter, it rains a lot. I can't imagine all these people riding their bike to the grocery store. They're going to be driving. And with that many people, it's just going to lock up. It's going to be quite busy. And I'm concerned. It's just going to be really busy. And I think that space, can we just tone it down in the single story and just less units? And it will work for everyone, potentially. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else in the audience here like to weigh in on this agenda item? Not seeing any. David, online?
I'm not seeing any online.
No commenters online. Okay, given that, would the applicant like to take a few minutes to respond to any of this? Not mandatory, but welcome if you'd like.
I'm not sure if Kyle's coming up, but I can speak first.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, sir.
You know, just to speak to, there's a few items that I want to pass back to planning, but just to speak to some of the factual components. To clarify on the setback, so Kyle did not necessarily want to do commercial here. We spent a lot of time with the planning department to come up with a project that would meet the standards. And the commercial component is something that came from the zoning, in that we have to have, we could not have anything but commercial on the ground floor in the first 75 feet. So I just want to clarify, Kyle's not necessarily in the market for commercial. The parking, again, it's a mixed torch. You know, the city over recent code changes has depleted parking. So when we used to design for residential, it was based on square footage, and then that was reduced to just one space, minimum of one space per residence, regardless of bedroom. And there's actually a cap, so we can't go over a certain amount of spaces. So that's a little bit of a struggle. I understand people have cars, but then the city, you know, the zoning's pushing to limit cars and have more bikes. So that's a tough position for us. We're not trying to limit parking for any development reasons or financial reasons. It's just to try to satisfy the city's design criteria. I'm just going to go through a couple, and I'm taking notes as I'm hearing comments. And again, I'm just going to speak to the factual. As far as the tavern, and I don't know where that rumor started. We've never discussed a tavern, and as Dilo pointed out in the beginning, a tavern would require a use permit. It's not something that's principally permitted if we were, which we're not, going to apply for a tavern, that would have to come back before the commission and be a public hearing item as well. Natura with the engineering division has requested the traffic study. I wasn't quite clear on the discussion with the the enforcement of speeds and whatnot. Really with the traffic study, we're looking more at, again, from nature, whether a turning pocket or a turning lane is needed and how best to divert traffic in and out. And again, that's a struggle, more cars, less parking, to meet that happy medium. Just a few more notes, I'll make it quick because I'm sure the Planning Commission may have discussions. As far as topo, it's a pretty flat lot. We usually don't do topos when there's less than 10% grade, but with that being said, these are all slab on grade units to keep them as low as possible. And in addition, the way that they're designed is up down 2-story units. All of the ground floor units are either accessible per the building code or adaptable. So with that, we are building this at the minimum lot elevation, which is for siding 8 inches off of finished grade. And then the sidewalks have to be 4 inches above. So as far as height, topo, drainage, the building code has requirements we've submitted or worked on the MS4 drainage. So drainage and runoff, that is all built into the building code. We cannot divert water off of the site. It all has to be addressed on site with either landscaping areas, rain barrels if that's needed. We get credit for the amount of trees that we have and open space. So that is all codified. It's not something that's overlooked in any way. It's actually designed by an engineer. A few people touch on height, so we do have a 10-foot setback in the back. The maximum height on those residential units is 29 feet. Where zoning allows 35 feet. Do keep in mind that that's the highest peak of one of the units. The average eave is 20 feet and the median height on those buildings is 24 feet. I would point out that because it was commercial abutting residential, we had a 10-foot setback. Most of the new state standards with this housing crisis where they're encouraging maximum density or maximizing density are allowing, even on a small single family low residential lot, 3 or more units with a 4-foot setback. So it's changed and I get it, it's hard. Again, the state's claimed a housing crisis and people, it's not just Arcata. I work in every area in Northern California and beyond, and people are building houses. It's what's needed right now and they're building it. I'll tell you, there's not a ton of money in it with the cost of construction. So it's not a rich man's game, but it is a necessary evil. I think that's about the gist of it. I don't want to keep beating these comments to death. So if there's any questions of me, please feel free. Otherwise, I'll pass it on to Kyle.
Go ahead, Peter.
Sarah, the 75-foot setback, does that apply if you were far to the east? I mean, does it apply to the whole lot because there's a commercial space there?
Yeah.
Well, it's not. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sarah. I'll jump in to respond to that. It's a question about the interpretation of the code, and the mixed-use standards do state that residential uses shall not be in that 75-foot area. It's intended that that area be reserved for commercial uses. And as I'd mentioned earlier, I think this is an area that the Planning Commission should take a closer look at because it really does inhibit, many of our commercial mixed-use sites.
Any other commissioner questions while we have Sarah on? If not, please.
I think Sarah touched on most of the things that I was going to mention. But yeah, just to reiterate, I understand this is a huge impact on the neighborhood, and the design standards for the zoning are very restrictive in certain ways when it comes to residential. So yeah, I mean, ideally, we didn't want commercial on this, but unfortunately commercial is required. And then the 75-foot comes into play, which made us push the buildings to the rear of the property. If we had free reign on this property, it would allow for us to do a much better, design layout. But unfortunately, with the design standards and the requirements that we have, this is kind of how it came together. But again, I just want to reiterate that I really, Sarah and I put a lot of time and effort into designing this project to try to minimize the impact on the neighborhood, because we do understand. We do understand that, the design standards do allow us to go to 35 feet. We could do 3 stories. We could do a huge blocked apartment building, shadowing all the neighbors. But it was really important to me in my design to take into consideration, the following properties, the neighboring properties. And I understand that, a lot of people don't agree with that. But we really did put a lot of effort into trying to minimize the impact on this neighborhood. And like we mentioned, the FAR ratio, we're, I think, at 25% of what we could do. The height ratio, with the medium, roof height being at 24 feet. I understand it's still a huge impact, but we really did try to minimize this project. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
And I have one quick comment to add, brought to my attention by Commissioner Yodowitz during the break. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. There was a mistake in one of the conditions. I will take responsibility for that, regarding the residential lease agreement. It reads, the applicant, tavern operator, and property owner shall ensure basically that there is an agreement between the different use types that it is a mixed use project site. This was a condition taken from a different project suggested by my colleague Joe Matier, to essentially minimize the conflicts between users, and that was left in there by mistake. So I apologize for not catching that and for any confusion for the public. So there is no tavern proposed as part of this project.
Thanks for that.
Could you explain where that is again?
That's on packet page 23. It's condition B8. The first sentence after residential lease agreement. And what I would suggest that the Planning Commission change that to, if they consider approving this project, as just simply strike applicant, tavern operator, and property owner, and replace that with property owner. So it reads, the property owner shall ensure the lease agreement for the residential dwelling unit adequately acknowledges, and so on and so forth.
I'm hesitant just because everyone in the audience probably has questions. We had an extended public comment period, so I'd like to get to deliberations. I think the best thing for you to do would be to follow up staff outside of the meeting, and I'm sure you can get a good answer from staff, but I don't want to take Planning Commission time right now to get into staff questions. Thank you for that. Okay, I appreciate everyone's comments. I appreciate Sarah and Kyle's weighing in on their design view. I'd like to close public comment now and turn deliberations over to the Planning Commission. First off, does anyone like to start? Clarifying questions, comments, or a motion from anyone on the commission? Judith?
Yeah, actually, here's a clarifying question for staff. I did notice in the ADU law text that there's a 60-day limit on the amount of time between, I think, the application and the time when a project must either be approved, denied, or deemed to be approved. How does that apply here? And this is important because if we should recommend some design changes, we may unwittingly run up against that limit and find that the project is deemed approved.
Yeah, I'm going to give you the answer to the best of my ability. I don't know that this has been tested in case law or anything like that at this point, but I would offer that we are not following that accessory dwelling unit law to the letter. This didn't come in as an application, a building permit application for a ministerial approval of an accessory dwelling unit. Instead, what we're doing is we're evaluating all of the accessory dwelling units that could apply to the project throughout, its course, its history, based on our current zoning standards and saying we're taking those into consideration. So I would say, from my perspective, my interpretation would be that it doesn't apply at all, so we're not running afoul of any streamlining requirements.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that question, Judith. Does anyone else have questions, comments, discussion points for this project? Peter, go ahead.
Can we ask questions of the developer?
You certainly may, if you, just to the chair's discretion, obviously, but yeah, typically if you have a follow-up question that staff isn't, capable of answering, or it would be more appropriate for the developer to answer, certainly they can.
Okay, here goes. Do you plan on having a PV system in this development?
I can speak to that. Yes, solar is required for all new residential per the building code.
How are the benefits going to be distributed among the residents?
Of solar, I will have to defer that to the solar installer. I don't know that I'm equipped to answer that, but all new residential units, as part of the Energy Calcs Title 24, do require solar. So my understanding is that each unit would have solar. In addition to that, the building code has made some big changes as of January 1, code update to push for primarily all electric. So even if we do have gas, we have to be set up for electric. So at this point, many projects are just going all electric.
Thanks.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Sarah said too, we came across this with the previous project. So the Title 24 does give us the requirements for our PV systems, and in a lot of circumstances with duplexes, there's a minimum requirement for that duplex. But as a developer, we've put the extra money into that as well to distribute that system equally between each unit, so that way each tenant does benefit from that system. So, but like Sarah said, EV. We're seeing a lot of electric appliances required with the Title 24 requirements now with the new year. So a lot of this stuff is going to be filtered down through the building code and energy requirements.
Speaking of EVs, are you going to provide EV chargers in the parking?
It depends on what the Title 24 requires, but yes, there will be a requirement for EV parking. I don't know what it will be until we actually get to that report and it's made. But whatever the report is recommending or requiring us to do, we will propose in the development.
Let me suggest you do more than is required.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they put a pretty, they take in consideration all the units and stuff like that. And I don't know the exact calculation without us contacting our agent, but yes.
Go ahead, Joel.
If the city were to find a way to get rid of the commercial use requirement, how difficult, would you be willing to do all residential on the 11th Street frontage? And B, how difficult do you think that would be to, time-wise? What kind of a delay in the project would that result in?
Maybe David speak to the not allowing.
Yeah, so very complex answer to a simple question that I'll try and simplify. We are going through the general plan process right now, and we've adopted some policy changes to how mixed-use zones would be treated, and what those standards would be ultimately in the zoning code. We would have to follow up afterwards with some zoning changes to make that kind of accommodation if the project were to try and take advantage of the process we're already involved in. There are a couple other pathways that could conceivably be used to, process that request, but the most straightforward is to do a rezone. And at this point, we're so far into the redesignation with the general plan process, it just wouldn't make sense to start a rezone on this property. Plus, it would start to look a little bit like spot zoning, which we've addressed in some of the land use designations already that we've been reviewing. So to simplify that even further, I think, I'm not assessing the, the project feasibility associated with timelines, but it would significantly alter the timeline and put it likely behind the timeline that we're on for doing our general plan and rezoning updates.
As kind of a related follow-up, I touched on this earlier, but assuming you don't touch the zoning now, leave it as is, but possibly finding a way to reduce the 75-foot setback to allow the buildings possibly to be moved further south. How difficult might that be theoretically?
Is there not a contamination issue in the central part of the property which is forcing those buildings to be where they are, and regardless of the setback precluding moving those buildings south? Is that accurate?
There is this portion, to answer your question, there is this portion that I'm showing here on the screen. I'm circling the mouse around it. This is a land use restricted area where no residential uses are permitted. So this will always be a constraint in the middle, the western middle portion of the site, and that is a legal requirement.
Thank you. Go ahead, Peter.
Based on the comments we heard here tonight, are you willing to move? It sounds like you have some room to move south, and you certainly have some room to move east. And if you did that, you could probably provide, I'm guessing, a setback of 30 or 40 feet instead of 10 feet. Are you willing to do that?
So, I mean, if the 75-foot requirement had gone away, there's definitely a lot of opportunity to move some units around. There is, as you guys see, a large open area on the right, and at this time we don't have a specific plan for what is going to happen in the future, but we do understand that there is a large push for housing, and there is a huge housing need in this community. And and staff can maybe touch on this as well, but we do feel that it's necessary to leave opportunity for future development for more housing in the future if it is needed, without restricting that with a design now that could encumber or hurt us in the future to not provide the amount of housing that this may allow for. So I know that's a touchy subject, but it's something that maybe staff could touch on too, but we like to try to use as much leave as much open space as possible to allow for future housing if that does come available.
Judith?
Yeah, here are a couple of points that, again, they've come up in other projects and before any of the rest of you sitting up here were on the commission. A very significant policy that the city adopted, albeit informally, a few years ago, beginning with the area around Stewart School, that development, was that when accessory dwellings are to be part of a project, first, their location should be designated in the initial proposal, and secondly, once they're designated, you don't go incrementally adding them somewhere else. And so this particular plan on a parcel with a large area that has not been designated currently, the proposal seems to be taking advantage of some oversights in our policies on a couple of levels, and you might want to think about addressing those. The first is, if this had not been a mixed-use development zoning, but instead were governed by a planned development, and we saw a big blank space there, and we thought, well, we're reserving this for future development, we would really ask you to come in with a phased development proposal that would indicate what you're going to put on the whole site. This is a single parcel. It has not been subdivided. And you're taking advantage of a CEQA exemption as well as a mixed-use development density bonus, two features that allow you to come in with a proposal like this that sort of sneak under some of the policies that the Planning Commission has been attempting to abide by for at least a decade, and possibly longer. So what I'd love to see here is a new site plan that takes advantage of the opportunities to either move that near boundary development in the north and the west toward the south and the east, move the access road to the west side of the site, thus consolidating the asphalt with the existing Greenview Market parking lot and whatever they're going to do there in the future, and ideally bring us a site plan for the entire parcel. And I would really ask people not to applaud, but a site plan for an entire parcel when you're asking for two concessions, which granted are allowed by law, but which impinge on our ability to review the future of the parcel as a whole, I think that's something that we should ask you to do. And that in terms of marketing your development, may actually be advantageous for you.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to clarify, and maybe staff could reiterate this as well, but I know you used a few words like taking advantage of it. I think you're relating to the ADU law as in after this development is finished that we would be allowed to have more density on the lot, but that's incorrect. That's what we're proposing right now is the maximum density allowed per design standards and per ADU law. So for us to try to come in with a full site plan that represents what future development may look like is impossible for us, because we don't know what the zoning standards will be if this lot is rezoned in the future or if density is increased in the future. So for us to be able to come in and design a site plan with an increase in units and layout, we just can't do that because we don't have the standards to adhere to. So I think there was a little bit of misinterpretation there that we're building this and then as soon as we get done we could reapply for an ADU law that allows us to do more. That's incorrect. We don't. Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. But as of now, yeah, it would be hard for us to do that because we just don't know what that looks like in the future. So I don't know if staff has any comments on that as well.
David, yeah, please.
Okay, yeah, just briefly, I do want to, I understand, you've heard a lot from the neighbors who are concerned about the site plan and concerned about, location of buildings, height of buildings, the effects on those properties. And I, certainly, take those to heart and take those into consideration. I want to kind of reflect on, the characterization of this as having, snuck under policy. I think that what we're doing here is actually consistent with the policy that Commissioner Mayer reflected on, where you're actually getting an opportunity to identify where those ADUs would be built on site while you're evaluating the current development proposal that meets current development standards. And so this project is not sidestepping any standards. As Sarah mentioned, it completely comports with all standards and isn't asking for any exceptions. And in terms of a phased development or a PD process, PDs still require that you preserve the underlying base zoning uses on site, even with the most advanced PD that allows you to have uses that are not allowed on site. You still have to have uses on site, and those uses would defer to the design considerations that are in the underlying zoning. And so you could potentially be having a different discussion, about some of the site standards if you were looking at a PD. But again, we are, and this comment goes to some of the other attempts of commissioners to try and redesign the project from the DS in an attempt to try and mitigate or negotiate, a project that you feel kind of meets in the middle. and that is that the project meeting these standards, sort of begs the question that, whether or not you can make those findings. And staff has prepared findings for your review. And, they're in your packet. And the question is, can you make those findings? Ultimately, there may be some changes that, you've asked, is the developer willing to make those modifications? And, you've heard, well, no, I'm interested in doing this development based on the current standards that are available to me, recognizing that there may be changes to the standards that allow for additional development in the future. And that's why I'm preserving, this additional space, so that if there is a second phase in the future based on the changes that the city council makes, that the site and the community, frankly, can take advantage of those and the additional housing that will be procured through that process. I do want to recognize this is a dramatic change. In my neighborhood, I had the exact same thing happen, where I benefited from a neighbor's vacant parcel for a decade or more. And then it was developed, and it was, dramatic change for all of my neighbors and myself. And so I relate to that. And so the commission really is looking at, the standards that are before you, the findings that are before you, and trying to assess, does this project meet the standards? And I appreciate your attempts to negotiate those concerns, recognizing that even if the units were moved around, the space that was left behind might get infilled in the future once and if the standards are changed in the future.
Got it. Thank you for that. Matt, you want to weigh in?
Yeah. I really like this project. We're in a severe housing crisis. I've been on the commission 6 months, and this is the first significant new housing we've actually looked at approving. I look at the staff report that a similar project was proposed 30 years ago, and I think about all the lives that could have been better to have that housing 30 years ago. I really appreciate the thought that went into this project. I think it was a good design, and I'm ready to approve it.
Joel?
I am generally supportive of the project. We are in a housing crisis. I recognize that whatever type of housing is built is going to impact somebody. But I think we would be doing a disservice were we to start denying projects because somebody is going to be impacted. I do have a few comments for the applicant. One, I would appreciate in the future if you were to come back here on other projects to perhaps do some, and maybe you have and we haven't heard it, but do some community outreach prior to coming to the commission. It could result in a better project. I have a couple of specific comments about, which I'm not sure of, regarding the details of the project. In terms of the surface for the parking, is there any requirement, or do you plan on having some sort of like permeable surface or something to be more environmentally sensitive than asphalt?
So once we, and Sarah can maybe touch on this as well, or have it a better answer, but so we will be required to have an MS4 report done by a certified engineer and stuff, and at that point they will provide calculations on which parts of the parking may have to be permeable to meet our site requirements for runoff and stormwater. So we don't have specific plans ourselves on how that will be, but we do have to do our MS4 that will in turn provide those details for us. And if there's any more that Sarah would like to touch on as well, our staff.
I can just speak quickly that, yeah, the engineers will design. We often do incorporate permeable pavers or paver stone of some sort. I would say that when we design this, we minimize the parking and paving as much as possible and kept as much open space. The courtyard in between the units is designed as permeable as well, so not just a big concrete patio. So we do take that into account up front, and then as we work through the building process and the engineer will, with the calculations, verify how much we need of permeable paving.
Thank you. I have a couple more comments. I'd like to see in this project or future projects something like green roofs, and any other way to incorporate environmentally friendly design that not only meets current code requirements but surpasses them. Are there going to be any affordable units proposed in this project?
There are none proposed, no.
Staff, is there a requirement? I assume there isn't because none are being provided.
Yeah, there's not currently a requirement for restricted affordable housing.
Peter, go ahead.
One more energy suggestion. Are you planning to use heat pump technology for the space and water heating as opposed to hooking up for natural gas? In other words, being all electric? Because the new Title 24 building standards, it will require you to make these units electric ready, so-called. And if that's true, why not go all the way and use heat pump technology?
Right, so you will most likely see heat pump technology on all these units. Any of the new designs and developments that we've done here with the new energy code for this year have pretty much required heat pump technology. The Title 24 can kind of be confusing because there's a score that you get, so you could up your insulation or get solar batteries to compensate. So, but the standards are more restricting now, and it's near impossible from what I've seen to not use heat pump technology in multifamily, what I've seen so far. So I would say that they will probably most likely be used here. Yeah, gas will be very much minimized on this project.
Okay. I appreciate everyone's observations. I have looked at this project, listened to everybody. I agree with the general sense that we are in a housing crisis and need to build homes. Arcata has committed to doing strategic infill, and I don't see how we're possibly able to do that without impacting neighbors. I appreciate the concerns. I'm also mindful of the fact that the development is asking for considerably less than they could on this lot. And so I think that's a very meaningful concession to what they could be building right now. If there's no questions at this point, looking for a motion if there is one.
I would make a motion to adopt the findings and approve the project.
Then we have a couple of modifications, modifying B8 to strike the first sentence and replace that with property owner, or first clause in the first sentence, replace it with property owner, and add a B9 referring to the condition regarding the upright bicycle parking.
So modified.
Okay, we have a first with modifications. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Judith?
I came in here planning to vote for this project. I've changed my mind. I think the principle of hedging on a parcel so that you can take advantage of changed standards in the very near future and not providing us with a phased proposal is something I will not vote for. So, nay.
Thank you, Judith. Motion passes. Okay, thank you for everyone and the discussion. We are moving now to our business items portion of our agenda this evening. We only have one business item this evening, which is to Consider a recommendation to the City Council on general plan updates. Can we begin with staff report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davies and Commission. We're sort of picking up after the recommendation that you made on your July 11th meeting and trying to clean up some of the content that we did not get to as a bare minimum, and then providing an opportunity over the course of the next several meetings to get into content where, you know, some commissioners had expressed a desire to revisit certain specific policies. At this point, you know, we've received some recommendations from various commissioners, and we've included those in the staff report. And where I was hoping we could start, if it's okay with the commission, is by picking up with the other considerations table. Recall, we've looked at this a few times where the policies were stated from primarily the Gateway Area Plan with recommendations. So the general plan topic, a recommendation was made, and we tried to track who had made that recommendation. Some were committee, some were community members who made recommendations for changes. We discussed the policy implications, staff recommendation, and then at 2 meetings ago, we asked you to look at this table and review it, and then submit your comments to staff, and then we would compile those comments and then look at them on your July 11th meeting. And so on July 11th, we did have an opportunity to briefly look at this table, but the commission was more focused on providing its overall recommendation. And so we held over the content on this. As you recall, you know, it's a very lengthy table. I will zoom in and focus on various aspects of it in just a moment here, but, you know, it has a lot of content. So there's, you know, it's a challenge to comprehend in total all at once. But what we've added here is the columns for each of your responses that you sent in to us independently, which we shared with you at the last meeting. At that time, we hadn't received Chair Davies' comments. We have since received those and are now sharing them with you again. What we've done is added in the PC recommendation column, the total number of votes, if you will, for continuing a conversation about this. So having, you know, at this point, well, there's 5 of you here tonight, but 6 who participated in this. At this point, you know, having greater than 3 would push you over into, let's definitely talk about this territory. Having 3 puts you right on the fence. 3 of you said, you know, words to the effect of, yeah, I'd like to talk about this more. And 3 of you said, no, I'm comfortable with the recommendation of staff. And so these numbers here, as you get above, you know, 3, you're starting to get, or as you get to 3 and above, you're starting to get in the territory of, does the commission want to take formal action to open these topics up again and review them? Or, you know, or do you want to just move forward? At this point, you don't have a solid 4 for any of these topics. Either you have zeros, which means everyone's comfortable with the change and ready to move on, or you have, you know, a maximum of 3 where some folks had, you know, comments. And so, for example, here on this policy, which was lane width, and the CRTP submitted a comment to reduce lane widths. 3 of you had some recommendations. Simmons said he strongly agrees with CRTP. Yodowitz said, you know, disagree with staff. I agree with CRTP that 10-foot lane widths. I'm sorry, that's Lehman, excuse me. And Yodowitz said, generally support staff, open to further discussion. And so, you know, there's kind of a range of, if you were doing gradients of agreement, this probably wouldn't make the cut, but we wanted to have the full discussion with you now. I'm going to move over to the simplified results, which, oops, maybe I'm not. I'm going to hide a couple of columns here so we could look at more content all at one time. And be able to see exactly what the commissioners had recommended. And we're just going to do one quick run through these things, and if there are topics that the commission want to take a look at further, we'll delve into those and make those decisions. But I wanted to just acknowledge right from the start that none of these, through that polling process that we did, that staff did outside the meeting that we're now sharing with you, raised to a level of meeting the requirements for reopening these issues. The majority or all of them have enough votes to move forward with what the staff recommendation was. So I'll leave it to you to how you want to move through these. Do you want to look at them in order? Do you want to look at the ones that had threes first and kind of dig into those policies, or I'm sorry, those comments that were made and see, hey, is there enough interest here to reopen those? And then the objective will be for all the ones that you don't want to move forward and have further discussion with, you'll take action and include that in your additional recommendations to the city council that they consider. Most of these, the last thing I'll say is that most of these relate to the Gateway Area Plan. We developed this during that process, and there was a lot more discussion about the Gateway Area Plan, and there were a lot more controversial issues in that plan than there were in the other general plan topics. And so you'll see most of these relate to the Gateway Area Plan. All of the changes that have been recommended that are not on this table through this process are already included in the current draft of the Gateway Area Plan. So with that, I'll defer to the commission how you want to move through these.
I like the suggestion of starting with the threes, if folks are okay with that.
Does everyone agree?
Could you repeat that?
He was suggesting that we start with all of the items that had at least 3 votes so that the commission would seem to be split.
I've looked through the chart, and there were several of these items where staff indicated there were only 2 votes, but when you actually read the comments, it appears that there were possibly more, starting with the very first one. When I'm reading, I think maybe we should just go through them in order.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. The first one is related to the K&L Street couplet. This was a decision that was made early on through straw polling. There were 2 members who said words to the effect of, they want to see this one. Mayor said, we should address this with the city council, but I think the PC did have the clear consensus on the urgent need for safety updates on K Street now. Yodowitz said, I support couplet provided a demonstrated trend to forego demonstrated need to forego linear park. Maybe some interpretation there, because I think you meant that the linear park would remain. I'd like to see traffic study results after safely improvements to K Street as PC previously recommended, with study taking into account probable build-out scenarios over time in the Gateway area. And then the rest of these were either concur with staff or Simmons said he personally disagrees, but the PC already voted and doesn't see a need to rehash the issue.
Okay, I think Simmons basically seems to be in favor of not dropping this yet. Is that correct or not correct?
No, I'm saying it's dropped. We voted. It was 4-2.
Okay, well, I would suggest this will definitely come up again with the city council, if only because we have a petition with nearly 1,000 signatures, and we will probably have people standing outside the room yelling. So I think it would be unwise for us to simply assume that we're done with it.
Let me clarify. I mean, we as a body by ourselves are done with it. It will come up again, but it's not a thing we need to discuss right now.
So oh, go ahead.
Joel, I don't understand why you think that the KL couplet would eliminate the linear park. Why can't we have both?
Well, I think it would affect the aesthetics of the linear park. I haven't seen the detailed design that demonstrates to me, and I don't believe I was on the commission at the time that this item was before the commission. And, you know, I don't think the couplet should be taken off the table. My personal view is, you know, if the KL couplet is necessitated by transportation issues based on traffic studies, and then I guess there's also the political overlay, maybe or the environmental overlay, that maybe if there's a lot of traffic congestion, maybe that's good, to discourage people from driving. But I'm not there yet completely on saying, you know, a yes vote for the couplet.
Got it. Okay. What I think is that if Matt clearly doesn't want to discuss this now and understands we're all going to be discussing this with the city council at our joint session, then that means the majority of us are fine with this right now. Let's move on to the next item.
The next item did get 3. This is retention of railroad right-of-way. And the recommendation was to, so first, adopted and added to conflicts table, railroad right-of-way should be used exclusively for multi-use trails, bus or light rail transit. And the deletion was railroad right-of-way may potentially be used for creation of multi-use trails. Long-range potential uses, railroad right-of-way include an exclusive bus, transitway, or passenger rail service. So that was the recommendation that was made on that, let's see, by the Transportation Safety Committee. Again, this would have implications for the K&L Street couplet, and based on the Planning Commission's prior actions, we recommended that this not be adopted because it would be in direct conflict with the action the Planning Commission took. And again, you had Commissioner Lehman saying unsure how to vote. He wants K&L Street couplet retained. Yodowitz had the same comment as above, and Mayor said appropriate legal wording to facilitate bike ped, greenway, and other non-rail uses. Link also to regional trail planning, and I would offer that those are already included both in the plan and in other planning documents we have related to a trail system.
So what was the tally then there? That was a 3 and 3 issue?
That was a 3 folks voted for it. Yeah, 3 folks said they were fine with the staff recommendation.
Okay.
And I guess I am too. I didn't realize I was.
And with that clarification, I don't have any problem with it.
Judith, did you want to weigh in on this outside of the comments that are listed for you on retention of railroad right-of-way?
No, I think it probably would have affected what I said to know that this was a recommendation from the Transportation Safety Committee. That would have been extremely helpful. But I think the important thing is that that right-of-way has implications beyond the city of Arcata, and there are regional components that I think need to be considered in whatever language we adopt. So
okay.
I'm not sure how it relates to that.
I think we've got a majority in support there.
Okay, the next one had no votes. Everyone concurred with staff. It was related to opportunity sites. Again, let's see, GA1B. Everyone, let's see, not everyone concurred with staff.
There were 2.
Yeah, there were 2. We had Simmons concur with EDC except for bike storage. Whoops, dang it, sorry. And Mayor said, yes, the gateway code should include this along with secure indoor bike storage, especially for larger projects. And I believe that that is basically, may have been miscoded as concur with staff. Let's see, EDC recommended not include. Staff suggests that such standards could be considered in the form-based code, which I believe they are, basically requiring high-density residential buildings to have storage space available to occupants within the building. So there, the idea here being that, bike storage and personal storage be included as components. And so that's something we can add into the form-based code.
I think mine was a typo. It was concur with staff except for bike storage. So a requirement for bike storage, not a requirement for general mini storage.
Gotcha. Okay, so no personal storage, but yes, bike storage. Got it. And I think if I read Commissioner Mayer's comment right, this is not actually a vote against what the staff recommendation, it's a vote for it. Yeah.
Okay, so we are ready to move on.
Okay. Okay, so the next one, Wetland Creek Committee recommended that they strengthen GA1H, which was relocating existing uses incompatible with the planned vision. We suggested that it should be a goal, not a policy. Everyone concurred with staff on that. Next one, GA1H, more explicit, deemed incompatible, can be possibly relocated, so not eliminating existing businesses. This is something to be left to the form-based code. Folks concurred with that. We actually have an implementation measure in the Gateway Area Plan as well for relocation. Non-conforming uses, a lot of comments went into the non-conforming uses section. And
excuse me, what was staff's recommendation on that?
For which one?
Non-conforming uses of vehicle-oriented uses.
Yeah, so the plan includes several balanced transportation policies and seeks to reduce the necessity for reliance on autos. Staff recommends against prohibiting future auto-related industry in the district writ large, and so we recommended no changes. We had all except Yodowitz concur.
I'm not sure that I understood exactly where that was coming from, because I really think that electric vehicle charging stations, bicycle-related vehicle businesses, stuff like that should be allowed in the gateway, and some of them should actually be encouraged. So I'm not sure exactly what that staff recommendation was that you marked that I'm concurring with.
So the recommendation was to make anything auto-oriented non-conforming. So gas stations, car washes, anything that, auto service stations.
Yes, I'm not concurring in that case.
That was the CRTP recommendation. Staff recommended against what CRTP said to allow auto use. There's too many negatives.
Okay, so it's very confusing not having that source material in there. So staff recommends that you don't have the blanket ban on auto-related businesses. Okay.
We also recommend...
Which you concurred with, right? Is that correct?
That's what I concurred with, correct.
And existing auto uses are, there's been some changes to the way that non-conforming, through public comment is being treated. And so existing auto uses would be able to continue, and they would even be allowed to expand under the current proposal. And there are, prohibitions on things like car lots in the future. But there may be, other, auto-related industry, uses that we might want to incentivize in the future that we're not aware of now. So we suggested not prohibiting it writ large, but not also including it as special status non-conforming, just standard non-conforming.
I thought, maybe I misread it, but I thought the proposed code prohibited new vehicle sales.
Auto sales are prohibited.
And the reason I voiced an objection is if one were to sell electric vehicles out of an office and not have a lot, but I've seen Tesla sales rooms that walked by in other cities that maybe have a car in them, I don't know, but they're basically an office. They do it on a computer. That would technically be prohibited, I assume, as a sale, auto sales, yet it's more, to me, more akin to an office.
Yeah, I think, there'd need to be some interpretation at that point. Auto sales lots is specifically what we prohibit. Certainly as the market changes and there are new ways of selling these products, there's, going to have to be some, flexibility in reviewing what specifically that is. I don't think the city is, seeking to, eliminate car use. It's trying to discourage car use.
And if someone wanted to open that kind of office-based car dealership, they could ask for a variance and explain there won't actually be any cars on this lot. And I think we would grant that in that case, but we don't have to preemptively allow all car dealerships to fix that problem.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I was suggesting a carve out for electric, but I'm okay with it.
Okay, the next one, single-family homes, amend the plan to include a section defining what owners of single-family homes on typical lots can do under the plan. I think this is actually addressed in the form-based code already, which was the recommendation of staff. And single-family homes have, clear pathway for, remodels, expansion, those kinds of things.
Where did that suggestion come from?
That was a public member.
Okay, when I was reading the form-based code, it needs to be clarified significantly.
I can certainly point out where it is located, and then we can evaluate that language for clarification. I think it's pretty, it's definitely the intent is that it's in there that existing single-family homes can continue to modify, have ADUs, that sort of thing. Okay, the next one, again, 0 votes, land use mix, public member said to set the percentage of buildings over 2 stories that are required to have commercial space on the first floor be mixed use. You dealt with this today in the project in some regards. We had everyone concur with staff on this, that the city has a long history of projects not being built because of requirements for ground floor commercial. This policy is responsive to that history. Staff recommends no change. Again, no, well, okay, 1 vote on the next one from Commissioner Mayer. This is related to notification. Make it part of the plan document that notice be required by developers and future occupants about what may happen in their neighborhood.
I think we addressed this at the last meeting.
Excuse me?
We addressed this at the last meeting. We increased notification requirements.
Correct. Yep. Yep. The next one has no comments. This was related to zone boundaries, create new zone types surrounding Creamery District. This came from, a couple of different sources, and we recommend not having additional zones. There have been, talk of it amongst various commissioners. Currently, you've recommended 4 different zone types, and you have concur of staff on all 4 of those, or all 6 of those.
Can I ask a question, though?
Yeah.
The issue of particular zones straddling the coastal zone boundary is something that I disagree with staff on. And I think for very practical reasons, it would behoove the city to adopt code that will not, in a sense, force the Coastal Commission to hold up our zoning amendments and our plan.
We discussed this some time ago, I think,
I think
right?
you probably discussed it at least once at one of the meetings when I wasn't here. But I think that's certainly something that should be brought before the city council and not simply dropped.
Yeah, certainly, you know, when you have your joint study sessions, you know, there'll be a range of topics that are, you know, identified in advance that we know are, you know, big concerns of the community. And then if commissioners have, you know, additional concerns, I'm sure there'll be time to raise those as well. This suggestion to split the districts across coastal zone line has been raised many times. It doesn't follow with any of the coastal zone planning that we've been doing for the last several years, and so staff continues to recommend that we not do that.
That's one of the reasons why we were stuck with the Ludke for many years after we had adopted a new zoning code.
Yeah, again, we can address that in more detail when we get into the coastal zone, but our current approach is radically different from our last approach, and will not allow for that same sort of time gap and delay. There is, I do want to acknowledge that there is some special zoning standards around the creamery building itself. Let's see, limit to 3 stories. And, you know, in the interest of, you know, these are our crib notes, I guess you could say. I'm going to not expose the people who made these comments. These are all public comments already in the record, but, you know, just for the sake of saving space and some privacy. Here, I'm going to, you know, skip through some of these. These are, you know, all of these had no recommendations, these 3. So just real quickly on, you know, building height, limit to 4 stories, limit to 6 stories, focus 8-story buildings in the gateway hub. None of those generated enough, you know, to shift what the commission's current position is, with the exception Simmons voted.
You can skip me.
Okay. What's that? I skipped 8?
I said you could skip what I said there. Just
Okay,
keep going.
we're going to skip that. On to building height, limit to 45 feet. Again, concur with staff. Again, Simmons would like to see 8-story buildings in additional areas. So still on building height. GA2B, consider whether all developments over 3 stories should require planning commission review. You did address this in pretty good detail. Commissioner Mayer did have you know, some concerns still, and I believe those will be raised. This will be one of the topics that we definitely discuss with the city council. Building height. There was some recommendation to have priorities among relative value of community benefits and try and set those relative values to development requirements. And I think we did try and do that to some extent. There's not a financial study to back that, but, you know, certainly the scale of the community benefits follow along with the scale of the projects. Let's see, this person, Tagney concurred with the public member. And again, there's a recommendation to discuss with city council. I think we're going to discuss community benefits with the city council. It's one of the most well-vetted segments of our planning process. Let's see. Mixed tenure, specific targets for mixed owner and occupied. This is really, you know, good, you know, philosophically, I think it's, you know, supportable. Policy-wise, it's really difficult to implement. So we indicated they're soft targets and don't recommend putting a hard target in there. Tagney, again, concurred with the, I think that's Tagney. Yeah, concurred with the public member. I'm not sure what's going on with the, let's put those on the bottom so we can see them. Okay, so these 3 didn't get any votes. They related to more comments around simplified development procedures. EDC recommended excluding. We talked about this with form-based code. Implication that increased density results in increased affordability is questionable. And you know, that's basically the results of our market study and kind of the, you know, supply-demand economics that we've been operating on. Nothing there. From commission, maintenance of multifamily structures, certainly, you know, having a maintenance district would be pretty complicated. Assessment districts have been established in the past, but this would be, you know, quite a bit to manage. We recommend specific conditions of approval or standards and allowing the enforcement process to guide that. Does anybody object to me kind of skipping through the ones that have no votes?
I suggest you do.
Okay.
Keep it
and
moving.
Again, in the interest of time, the ones that only raised one. Okay, so I'm going to skip down to the next one that has 3. Or two. We'll do 2. We have a vote for 2. GA7A, create or require potential for parking revenue and or ticketing revenue to be used to help support transit, pedestrian, and biking infrastructure. Again, this is a good idea philosophically, but those parking ticket and the enforcement revenue and the parking revenue from meters and whatnot, those are the portions that come to the city. Ticket revenue, actually, the majority of it goes to the courts, but the portions that come to the city do go into the general fund, and we can't earmark them, but I do think that philosophically, it's important to remind the council that, hey, we've got these enforcement regulations to try and do these special priorities with when budgeting comes up. So we've recommended against having a specific policy for that. There were two dissenting votes on that. GA7A, invest proceeds, metered parking, same comment here, same content. And, the Planning Commission, as it desires, can have more conversation internally about that. And maybe before you go to the City Council, this could be a minor footnote in your overall policy recommendations.
It's sort of outside of our scope, right? Like we don't.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah. It is a really good idea, though. But you have to recognize that that really good idea competes with all the other really good ideas that come up at budgeting time. So, okay, these ones had 2. These are related to L Street. Maintain current configuration. Remove concept of L as an arterial. Couple it with K. Again, the commission largely voted on this. L in its current configuration, even if the road is expanded, the configuration with trail segregated from roadway. And that roadway would have a road diet. It wouldn't be like K Street all over again. I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. And that was Yodowitz and Mayor kind of asking for a little more content on that, conversation on that. Next one's on L Street, same content. Next one's on L Street, retain L Street, make one-way and I Street one-way with stoplights at Samoa and I. This was evaluated through our, alternative standards.
That's a 1 vote.
That's a 1, thank you. Keep me on track.
The next 3 are zeros.
Okay, bike lanes, make 11th Street a class 4, not a class 3 boulevard, make KL and 8th and 9th class 4 from the outset. Bicycle network improvements are being planned in the general plan circulation element. Those are now out since when this was originally written. We also have grant-funded work that's doing some improvements on 8th and 9th Streets. Again, we had Lehman Simmons vote to have more discussion on that.
Yeah, so I said it in my comment, but I actually think we already voted to prioritize class 4 bike lanes wherever possible within the Gateway Code. So that's in there now.
Yeah, okay, good. Similarly with multi-use trail conversion, the idea of removing option to convert trail to road in policy GA7B. This relates to Q Street. And at this point, staff recommendation was that Q Street may be necessary for service traffic. That hasn't made it into the current plan. And this one didn't seem to get, I'm sorry, this one doesn't have a vote on it, but it seems like we made a mistake here.
It's just 1.
This is a 1. This one's a 3. We had 3 requesting for additional review to reduce the road width size to 10 feet. Again, the city engineer isn't here to speak on that, but if that's something that you want to discuss further, we'll bring that back.
And I think everyone just heard Dan say he prefers 10 feet while he was here. So this is, a hot topic right now.
Certainly is, yeah.
For me, the 10-foot width is related to the couplet and how we develop K Street and L Street.
Yeah.
I mean, if we only have a 10-foot width, that makes a difference in the L Street linear park and what K Street ends up looking like.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's something that could certainly be part of that discussion. And I heard Dan say he's in favor of 14 foot as a starting point, maybe.
Oh, I heard 10.
Yeah, maybe the skinnier the road, the better. So yes, so I guess this sounds like it's naturally going to come up again anyway in this context. Does the commission want to just acknowledge we're going to talk more about this? And this is not part of the recommendation of the city, the future recommendation, forwarding recommendation to the city council? Okay.
Well, so we had 3 votes. Would folks want to vote on 10 foot right now as a recommendation? If no, that's fine.
I believe the current recommendation is 12 feet.
Right, and I'm suggesting we could change that if other commissioners are interested.
I think that's something that we should bring to city council and discuss with them, because there's some engineering considerations that we may not be aware of here, especially for lanes that may include truck traffic, which is highly problematic in a 10-foot lane.
Yeah, I agree with Judith. Let's bring this to our conversation with the
Yeah,
city
and
council.
I'd like to have the city engineer have the benefit of being able to provide you his recommendation. If I recall, purple is kind of our color for, was it purple? Oh, yellow. I think it's yellow. I'm going yellow.
Yellow and purple makes brown.
Okay, we're going yellow. Okay, there was another 2 here related to, okay, this is lane width again. So yellow. Okay, and that is it. So what I guess the outcome of this, and I would love a vote to concur, is that this is now, these other considerations will be part of your recommendation, forwarding recommendation to the city council on these items, and with the exception of the 2 that are in yellow, which will be further discussed with the city council, that you're not making a formal recommendation on.
Agreed. Do you need go ahead, Judith.
I have a question. When I was going through this, I was also looking at a number of the recommendations that I had made in writing that I wasn't actually here to advocate for, and which apparently weren't addressed. Some of them were adopted, it looked like, by consent, and that's what it sounded like when I was listening online. But some of them weren't apparently addressed at all. Do I consider those now simply dropped? They're not going any further, or is there going to be an opportunity to bring them up again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we added all of those. I hope that everything has been added. A lot of this happened a couple weeks when I was out, but I think that we've added everything to the current version of the bike rack, if you will. This discussion guide. And so we do have the opportunity to go back and revisit the discussion guide. We have the opportunity, some commissioners wanted to look back at other elements that don't have content on the discussion guide yet. And so I think over the course of the next several meetings, you'll be resolving on those issues that are still outstanding, recognizing the time, and I'm sure the chair is wanting to move shortly into the next agenda item. It may be good to open public comment on this item and then take an action on the work that you've done tonight, and then make a direction for staff so that we can make sure that we bring back to you the content that you want to look at the next meeting, including this.
So the bike rack is still the bike rack?
Bike rack is still
in
alive
play.
and kicking. And it was funny, I made a typo today. I wish we would have called it the bake rack. Because
it sounds nice.
Yeah.
Not only is it still there, but we, when we talked about how to prioritize our time, we all wanted to wait until you were back until we got into those issues. So not only are they still there, but we wanted you with us. So
Thank you.
Public comment on our gateway discussion this evening. Okay, we are ready for public comment. Gentlemen?
My time to Fred Weiss.
Thank you. I wish I could ask for some leeway on time here because there's way too much to cover even in 6 minutes. First I want to say that now that you've achieved your goal of supplying an interim working draft of the general plan, gateway area plan, and form-based code, you should feel emancipated and you should be relieved from the rush that we have seen over these last months and take care of business on your own schedule. May I suggest that you schedule an actual meeting time for bike rack issues rather than continually leaving it for that never land of as time allows. Over the past few months, I've given a lot of leeway in the process and the presentation. There have been a lot of information presented that has not been factual. I haven't called it out because I also wanted to see things move forward. Everything that we were done was done. We were told was interim and could be revisited. We were told that, okay? This other consideration table is compiled, most of it is 10 months old. I think it would be nice to have an update of it and what has gone in. It was originally things that were in conflict with the second draft of the Gateway Area Plan, which came out in October 2022. Next, I want to say the word linear park has been co-opted to mean different things. The people who have signed have over 1,000 signatures. They are talking about a full width linear park. By definition, a linear park is anything that's less wide than it is long. To call the pathway that would exist next to a road on L Street, to call that a linear park is a real slap in the face disservice to the people who've been working on this. They envision L Street as a relatively car-free of Wunderf. There would have to be some cars, but not a linear park such as a pathway next to a road. I know the director doesn't like when I refer to it as a truck route. It is a truck route. It would be a designated truck route in Arcata. At one point there was a mention that affordability is reflective of supply and demand. I 100% disagree. We have a virtually insatiable demand here. I want to say again, I strongly object to the open agenda listing where the public has no idea what is going to be talked about that evening. And I present that the director knows what he's going to talk about, what the subject is. To not include that in an agenda item has been ruled on by the courts. I found at least 4 case listings where this has been upheld. It is not good for the public to not know what is going to be discussed. I mentioned to visualize the setbacks that you were talking about. I did a very crude 3D modeling. It's on arcata1.com/PC, which is your portal. And I mentioned the Will Adams building. As you are very aware, I have many issues with the existing other considerations table since it first came out. As one small example, I am listed as the person who said that the Creamery District should have its own zone. It was not me. It was the chair of the Planning Commission. And I ask you, how would you feel if your comment was disregarded to that extent? So I consider that to be false, one of many items that are false on this table. Plus, the table should be much larger. I also want to point out that what the public received as this table is not what you see. It's not what was presented here. The public didn't get this information. That's why I call it a Brown Act violation. The phrase concur with staff was there, but not what the staff recommendation. That was not in what was available to the public. So how in the world could we reflect upon concur with staff, what that means when we don't know what the staff recommendation is? It's not in the table in the packet. Another small item on this, the map showing the walking distances, that was one of my items. It's 100% false in the packet, in the general, in the gateway area plan. You can approve it, but I'm sure this will be not pass scrutiny with the council. There's a mention of an architectural group here. I'd like to know who is in that architectural group. This would be a great use of the gradient voting system, because one person could feel strongly about something and 3 people could be lukewarm about something. It'd be very different than just say, concur with staff. I'd like to get some explanation of the conceptual greenway that's shown on page 46 of the form-based code, which shows it currently cutting through 2 private properties. What else can I say? I do a lot of work on this. I respect what you're doing. Don't misunderstand me. But there's a lot here, and there's a lot that we're not getting. I started Arcata1.com because we were not getting information from the city. That was over a year and a half ago. We're still not getting all the information that you need, in my opinion, In my opinion, you need to make informed decisions. It has not been forthcoming to you. It comes up in small ways here and there, and that's what I pointed out, some of them.
Thanks for your comments, Fred.
We do have one person online at this point.
Alrighty.
Go ahead, JB.
Hello to Planning Commission and to staff. I do want to speak to the uncertainty of the future of the L Street corridor. It's covered under a number of topics there that you went over. And one thing is for certain is that the L Street couplet promises to pave over open spaces at the north and south end of the corridor. This path at best will be reduced to a Class 1 trail to a Class 4. It will increase traffic that will make the corridor less safe. The noise on this active transportation corridor will impact commuters, destination users from both Arcata and from all the new infill, in addition to travelers of the Great Redwood Trail. You need to address the safety conflicts on K Street. Dan Burton offers some great solutions on K Street. One of them was 20 miles an hour speed limits, speed domes, roundabouts, reducing parking. In addition, you need to consider other options for how to deal with this. I think you should be considering diffusing traffic. We've only been presented with this one solution that K&L will move traffic in and out of town on that corridor. And there's other solutions. I mean, you can consider things combining 17th Street with Q Street, with N, with V, and, using 11th as a mover to basically move them through town. I just think you can do better. I don't think you're trying hard enough on that. And I can see right now that you already have some questions about what are the potential problems. And I just think there's other solutions, and you're getting ready to sacrifice what is the place that should be, the welcome map for the Great Redwood Trail. Instead, you're just settling for this thing because in the beginning, this is what's been presented to us. And I'm thank you for considering that there's some issues here, and I hope you consider more. And thank you for your time. And don't forget, there's over 1,000 people that do not want that. It is explained that it's for the designation of L Street as a linear park and to eliminate the couplet from consideration. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks for your comments. Do we have any more commenters waiting?
We do. Go ahead. Whoops. Go ahead, Patricia.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I had the privilege of going to the Dan Burton walk this weekend in Arcata, and I actually went to the Blue Lake walk and presentation as well today. And I think all of you should definitely watch his presentation. I know HCOG has a taping of it, and they will be posting it on their website. He is modern with his take on walkability and cities. And what I realized listening to him and some of his solutions on making a bike and pedestrian friendly city was that the city of Arcata is very antiquated, and they're relying on LOS, and it's really a backwards solution in a lot of ways. And I think you should watch it, and you would realize there's so many remedies to K Street that would be wonderful, a wonderful addition to the city that would make K Street actually an enjoyable route through the city. The L Street, K Street couplet is not a road diet, is an open space diet. The people want the open spaces and the greenways along the pedestrian path. They do not want a road to go through there, and they want to protect those open spaces. So saying that we're going to have a linear park is absurd, or saying what I've heard the city say and other people that are championing the city's voice, saying that it will enhance the pathway. It will not enhance the pathway, especially when you're moving it and you're paving open those open spaces. This is not what 1,000 people so far and counting have signed the petition for. We want what the 2010 feasibility study for this whole corridor promised us. There will be no linear park if this couplet goes through. That is absurd to say that there's going to be a small patch of grass that we can call a linear park. 14 feet was not the recommendation from Dan Burden. Sorry, David Loya, that is false. It was 10 feet, maybe possibly 11 feet at the most, but it was 10 feet what he recommended to slow down traffic. So I really suggest you watch these presentations. I was really disappointed that none of the planning commissioners were there. I know Matthew Simmons wasn't at the walks, but he was on a walk that wasn't scheduled on the public's notice, so the public didn't know about it.
Thank you,
so
Patricia.
anyways.
Thank you for your comments.
Go ahead, Lisa. I can see you're unmuted, Lisa. Can you speak for a test real quick?
Yeah, hi.
There you
Good
go.
evening, commissioners. Given the breadth of discussion and concern about quality of life issues surrounding the Boughton development, I think it is important for the commission to carefully consider the changes that are being proposed for existing neighborhoods throughout the city in the general plan update. Impacts of commercial, mixed use, and density bonuses, minimum and maximum setback requirements, and the impacts of high density residential in residential low neighborhoods are issues that should be carefully considered. Maintaining a quality of life in our community is extremely important to everyone. Displacing individuals, many who are seniors, who are living in homes that are affordable based on the simple fact that they have owned or rented them for many years, is not a win for the community. Yes, we need to provide housing, and infill is absolutely the way to do this. However, if we are not extremely careful and mindful and do not listen to what has been identified tonight as issues, we will, over time, diminish the desirability of our community, which would be a devastating consequence. Thank you for your consideration and time.
Thank you for your comments.
We have one more. Go ahead, Jane.
Hello, this is Jane Woodward. Good evening. I didn't prepare comments. On the other hand, I want to simply note that the concept of having a park that goes from the north end of the Gateway area all the way to Samoa is an amenity that you can't, that other communities are striving to create. And here we're talking about eliminating it. We want a walkable, a safe, walkable, bikeable area. We've got one. And what we're doing is talking about eliminating it by introducing traffic. I think it should not be, the LKL Street Couplet should not be part of this plan. Maybe put it on as a possibility for the future. On the other hand, I think you need to very much consider keeping it and developing it as a park, because it is an amenity that will create a great deal of enrichment for the community, and all the new housing that we're anticipating putting in this area. So I think you're missing the mark when you're not thinking about this as a center, an alternative center to the plaza, which a lot of people don't like to go to because of all the students. This is a family center, and you can develop it as such. It's where we have a lot of events around the creamery, and to introduce traffic there, I think, is a major error, and we would be forfeiting a major amenity that would attract people to this new area we're creating. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thanks for your comments.
That's all the public commenters we have.
Okay, let's move on then. Appreciate everyone's work this evening, as always. The next item on our agenda is correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members?
And
Any
just to be
correspondence
clear,
from
you
staff?
did not take action on the community benefits table or give direction to staff as to
Oh.
what to bring forward. So we'll bring that next time if you want, and then we'll focus on bike rack next time.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Any correspondence from staff?
Just really quick, I wanted to emphasize what a couple of public members had stated, that Dan Burden's presentation that he provided last night was recorded. It's hosted by HCOG, Humboldt County Association of Governments, and they are going to host that on their website. I'd really encourage everyone to go take a look at it and hear what he has to say, and just thrilled that for folks who have been able to participate in his walking audits. And then the second, I did mention this earlier, but I wanted to make sure that I communicated it at correspondence, that the minutes from the March 14th, 2023 meeting have been corrected. The issue with the 3 asterisks has been resolved. There are no longer 3 asterisks. We've just corrected the minutes. And there was some confusion that kept going through iterations as we brought it back each time. I went back and listened to the video from that meeting, and the commission actually took action on it. I'm not sure what happened between that action and the following meeting when we brought the minutes back, but we started going through these iterative cycles. And so similar to today, where the change was proposed, the change was made, and you won't see those minutes again to take another action on them. But given the confusion, I can tell you that I am paying excruciatingly heightened detail to the minutes, and I will let you know next week when they're uploaded so that you can go and verify for yourself, just as a little bit of accountability that we finally got those ones right and that we've gotten these ones right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.